All right, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. I know you're all eagerly awaiting this release, so we're happy to present this to you. And if you've already played around with it a little bit, I'm sure you'll understand why we're super excited. So before we get into showing you around, I just wanted to take care of some introductions and a few housekeeping items. So if you've never done a webinar with us before, my name is Lila Roselle, and I'm on the marketing team here at JazzHR, and I'm joined by John Volpe, who's on our product team. Welcome, John.
Hi, everyone.
All right, so as an FYI, we will be recording the webinar and sending out the slides, so if you do happen to get a phone call or anything during today's session, you can absolutely jump off and catch up in a minute. So feel free during the webinar as well to put in your questions into the chat box at the bottom, and we'll be monitoring those and answering as many as we can today at the end of the session. But if we don't get to your question, hang in there and we will ask support to jump in and take care of you after the webinar. So even if it's just like a random question that you're not sure we'll get to, please do punch it into the chat box, and we'll definitely make sure that somebody gets back to you. So they're not going into a black hole or anything, don't worry. And all right, we're going to have a brief agenda here. So we're going to go over what are knockout questions, how to set them up, some of the updates we've made that you might have seen as you've been kind of screening candidates so far. Then we'll have a Q&A. And before I pass it off to John, I did want to ask you guys a quick question here. So, what are some of the most common reasons that you reject a candidate? So feel free to plug in some of your responses here. You can pick multiples. So, if you do have a few in here that make sense, feel free to select multiple answers, but I'll give you guys just a minute or so to answer that. And we're just curious, and we thought you guys might want to see, what all everybody is rejecting candidates for. So, and as an FYI, you can use knockout questions to disqualify candidates for every single one of these reasons. This is absolutely a perfect feature if you find that a certain percentage of the candidates that come through, don't meet these requirements or don't meet, custom ones that you have specific to the position. All of these can be set up to just automatically flag or disqualify the candidates. And obviously, we'll go into that in some detail. But I'm going to close up here in just a couple seconds. Looks like we've got almost everyone responding, so I'll just give everybody just a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close out here. So pretty interesting. Most of them for lack of experience. So yeah, not surprising that that's the case. So you can use custom questions to set up that lack of experience, and John will show how you can go about that. But all of the other answers are, other than the proper certification, depending on what you're looking for, are going to be available right in the profile questions, which we're going to cover first. So this will really save a lot of your time. Especially these the 91.7 most the most common reasons that you reject. You're going to be able to get those people right out of the running, maybe knock them into a different disposition that might indicate that, so you can take a look at them later. So all right, enough of me. I'm going to hand it over to John, who's just going to give you a brief overview of how this works, and then he's going to dive right into the product.
Awesome. Thanks, Lila. Yeah, so I'm really excited to kind of announce the launch of this feature, and like Lila mentioned, some of the other updates across the app. So we're going to start here with what do knockout questions do inside of JazzHR. So there could be, maybe you're familiar with some other systems and some other ways that they structure knockout questions, and we might do things a little bit differently. So I want to kind of go over kind of the two functionality, the two pieces of functionality that to offer. So there's the ability to auto-reject candidates based on answers to certain questions, and then auto-flag, which there's a minor difference between the two, and I want to go through that and explain the value between each of those different kind of functions. Again, like Lila mentioned, these are based off of common questions that we have in JazzHR and ones that you build on your own. So, if you think high level, obviously about kind of the recruiting funnel, they call it a funnel because you get a lot more of the work is needed at the beginning of the process, because you usually get an influx of candidates that apply to a particular job, and only one or two candidates from that pool actually make it into an offer stage or a higher stage, and progressively less candidates as you go through the recruiting funnel. So really the main goal of this feature is to help you eliminate some of that busy work with recruiting candidates two ways. One, just easily identifying incorrect answers or questions or answers that you've deemed incorrect on the candidate profile, so you can quickly make that decision manually. The other side is really, ramping up the amount of time that we could save you by just auto-rejecting candidates. Maybe there's some of those questions like they're not certified, or some of those questions that, we just went through in that poll that are really deal breakers from your perspective. So you can take kind of some of those deal breaker type questions and immediately auto-reject candidates based off of that. And not even have them in your view while you're actually going over some of the new candidates that applied. And again, don't worry about some of the things that go on with rejections, like emails and things like that. We have some really cool ways that we handle rejection emails along with this. So it's not as an abrupt thing for an applicant that applies and immediately gets a rejection letter. We're going to do some things in the app that helps you guys still portray a really good, company rapport by reaching out in a good manner. So we'll kind of go through that as well throughout this demo. And then the last piece here that I kind of want to just talk about, there are some updates to where you review kind of the job application, or where you screen candidates inside of Jazz. Now, obviously, it's within the candidate profile, but just some updates there for where these different items show up and how you can tell if a candidate was auto-flagged or auto-rejected. And then lastly, we're going to jump into kind of questionnaires, talk about kind of just a high level, some of the restructure that we did. A lot of this was just adding functionality and adding more organization to the questionnaire kind of feature inside of Jazz. So just a minor update that I want to go through there. So without further ado, let's jump into the app here. I'm going to share my screen. Great. So to start and explain kind of the in-app changes, let's start within the context of a job. So in this first part, I'm going to go into a job. I'm going to come in to edit a job. And you can imagine when you're creating or editing a job and you're kind of filling out the job application, you are essentially creating the job application in this tab here. This is where a majority of the changes with this feature are at inside the app. So let me just first, I want to walk you through some of the updates to this tab, and then I'm going to come back through and go through how you create knockout questions. So a quick update here. The first update is how you add kind of common or profile questions to the app. So we didn't change the profile questions that you can add in here. We simply just changed the way that you add them. So you can get a list of the ones that are already going to be on the job application. Clicking this edit button will allow you to select more. So this list, obviously, if you've been using Jazz for a while, looks familiar to you. It's the same list. It's the same way that you would typically select them in the past. We kind of just put them underneath this edit icon. So the main purpose there is to really show you just the questions that will be asked on the job application much more clear in this view. The next change, and perhaps the biggest change outside of knockout questions itself, are the updates to questionnaires, in this case screening questionnaires. So in the past, before this launch, we only allow you to create questionnaires or select from existing questionnaires. You couldn't do any type of editing on the fly within the context of a job. So that's one of the things that we wanted to unlock here. One caveat to all of this, rules and permissions obviously play a little part into this, and I just want to, let you guys know that, the same rights apply to this questionnaire section as they do in the settings section. So super users and above have the ability to create and edit questionnaires within the context of a job, whereas a recruiting user and below will only be able to select questionnaires if they have rights to create a job. So I kind of wanted to just make that clear. I'm not going to necessarily walk through that experience unless we get some questions at the end, and then I can log in and walk through some of those. But essentially, a recruiting user that can't access templates inside of Jazz can only select existing questionnaires. They cannot create new or edit existing. So first I want to kind of show you the new way that you can create questionnaires really quick here. By default, we're going to give it the name of the job. We've also introduced a new folder structure, which I'm going to go over in a second. And then once you select the folder, you can then start to create the questionnaire here. One of the big things, so because we give you the ability to edit questionnaires within the context of these jobs, we want to communicate to you if they're used by other jobs. So in this scenario where you're dealing with a questionnaire that is used across multiple positions, you want to be cautious of making those changes within the context of just one job. So we, at the bare minimum, want to give you that information. So for example, if I select another questionnaire that I know is shared by other jobs, you will be able to see, one, the fact that they are shared by other jobs, and two, what other jobs are they shared by. So again, you can make the informed decision to edit these questions knowing that it's going to affect those other jobs. And then, like I mentioned, full edit rights, again, if you have the ability to edit templates within your account, you can reorder, you can come in here and you can edit the name of the questionnaire and the folder they exist in. And most importantly, you can edit individual questions. Again, the changes will happen on all the other jobs that this questionnaire exists, but you can make all the edits within the context of the job. This is really nice, especially if you're using per job questionnaires and you don't necessarily use a template across all of your jobs, which is one really good piece of functionality. And just to back up for 1 second and just give you a 1,000-foot view of questionnaires briefly. Questionnaires are the ability to add custom questions to the job application. There's also a second piece of this where you can send questionnaires after somebody applies to further qualify them. And the reason that I mention that is knockout questions are going to be specifically tied to the job application questions when somebody's actually applying for a job, and not the context where you're actually sending a questionnaire out after somebody applied. And I kind of want to just make that apparent here. And one last thing that you can do with questionnaires here is you can add questions. Again, adding this question will add it to the 2 other jobs, but the goal here is to give you full flexibility with what you want to do on a per job basis, and then inform you that it's going to affect other jobs. Last but not least, we did add the EEO information to the job application tab. You will still see it on the job posting tab. So just to briefly show you what that looks like. On the job posting tab, at the bottom, at sensitive data, you can address the fact that you want to add EEO questions to the job application, but then you kind of get that reiterated on the job application itself if you want to make any changes. Again, the goal there is this right side of this page is to show you everything that is going to be included on the job application all on one page. Now, what's also really cool is we added kind of a full preview mode of the job. So if you kind of have this toggle up here, you can turn preview on, and you can get a really good idea of what this job will look like whenever it's applicant facing. You'll notice that we're using this preview in the context of our responsive job board layout. I recommend that you can briefly look into this if you're using a different job board layout than the responsive layout, like the legacy layout. I recommend that everybody use the responsive layout. One, it just looks better, it's an updated version, and it's a mobile-friendly apply screen. So I just suggest that you guys all switch over to the responsive layout. If you're not on the responsive layout, you will have a quick link here to do so. But essentially, this just gives you, exactly what it will look like on the job application. So then you can be confident whenever you open this position that you know what it's going to look like. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, and we get to talk about how to set up knockout questions. So the first update you'll see is kind of this gray empty state up here that kind of says, to start this process, to auto-flag or auto-reject candidates, create a knockout question. So how do we do that? Again, if you ever want to learn more, Lila mentioned that we're going to be sending some materials out after, including this slideshow and the video, but you do have quick links to support articles here. And under this What's This link, just a brief explanation of how to set up and use knockout questions. So guys, that's a lot to get your questions answered as well. But okay, let's set up some knockout questions. So per the slide, you can set up knockout questions for common or profile questions and custom questions. So let's first jump in and talk about profile questions. So our knockout questions are tied to two types of questions, and that's drop-down answer types and checkbox answer types. So for this example, I'm going to select two questions that are disqualifying or knockout questions for this job. So the first one's going to be age 18 or older, and then the second one's going to be highest education obtained. So once those questions are added, I can now add disqualifying answers to those questions. So let's first start with the highest education obtained. So in this scenario, I need somebody with at least some college experience to be a DeLorean technician. So I'm going to come in here and flag GED and high school as disqualifying answers. I can come down here and save it, and you'll see that this is now deemed a knockout question. One quick one before we get to this age 18 or older. As soon as we add one question, now you have the ability to create an action based off of that question. So I kind of wanted to show you that as soon as you have one knockout question, it kind of triggers the ability to start adding actions based on that knockout question, which we'll get to in just a second. But I'm also going to come down here. I'm going to add a disqualifying answer to age 18 or older, and I need somebody 18 or older, so I'm going to flag that answer. The disqualifying answer is no. And next is screening questionnaires. So how do I flag screening questionnaires as disqualifying? Really easy. I can come in here. You're going to come into the actual question, edit the question. You'll see a list of, so again, knockout questions can only be applied to drop-down and checkbox answer types, again, because those have definitive answers. And mainly, you do, just as far as a best practice standpoint, you do want to set up, knockout questions to be more binary type answers. You don't want any gray area for whether it's going to potentially auto-reject or not. So you want to make sure that you're choosing questions that are 100%, knockout or disqualifying questions. Again, you don't necessarily want, in some of these cases where we're auto-dispositioning or auto-rejecting candidates, they're never going to be in your view of new to actually screen them. So I just really advise that you take a good look at the questions that you deem as disqualifying, and make sure that if you do add this action to them, which we're going to go over in a second, that they truly are disqualifying, and they're a reason that you wouldn't even want to look at that candidate's profile. So I'll explain that in just a second, but only drop-down and checkbox answer types can you add knockout questions to. So again, the screening questionnaire is a great way, if you're looking, this question up here could easily turn into how many years of experience do you have using Salesforce? And if you're hiring a sales representative, maybe you need somebody with Salesforce experience. That's a great example of a question that we don't have in the profile questions above, but you can kind of customize on a per job or per company basis for what you deem to be a knockout question. For this example, we need somebody that can work with a flux capacitor, so we're going to flag anybody that answers no. Again, I just want to show you an example of, this is a question that is not a drop-down or a checkbox answer type, so you'll notice that there is no way to flag these types of questions. Okay, so now we have 3 questions that are flagged for this job, and they're kind of deemed as knockout questions. So the next step that we can do is we can add a auto reject action based off of those knockout questions. I just want to mention one thing really quick here. You don't have to do this. You don't have to set up a auto rejection to get value out of our knockout questions. There's a big piece to this where if a candidate applies to this job right now as it is, which I do want to show you that. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to apply as a candidate. And again, remember the questions that we deemed as disqualifying. So we can come in here and maybe I'll choose high school and I'm not 18 or older and I have never worked with a flux capacitor. So I have applied to this job. I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you exactly what that candidate looks like. So this is the scenario where I've set up 3 knockout questions, but I have not applied an action. And this is kind of the part where we say, you noticed in our slide and before we kind of say auto flagging, this is exactly what we mean by auto flagging. If you scroll down to this job application section, which again, this is a new section that I want to talk more about, but you'll notice that these questions are flagged as disqualifying answers. So without adding an action, without auto rejecting this person, it still, as a reviewer, as a screener, allows me to come down and quickly identify questions that I've deemed disqualifying. So then, maybe some of these aren't 100% deal breakers, or maybe, if they answer all 3, maybe it is, but maybe if they just answer 1, it's not 100% of a deal breaker. So I can now use this flagging system just to speed up how I qualify people. And to easily, make my decision to advance or reject or vote on them based on these flags. Now, one other area, so I want to talk about while we're here, this update to the job application section. This is a completely new section. Again, it's on the candidate profile. It is underneath the resume and the cover letter. And the job application is a point-in-time snapshot of all the information that the candidate filled out on the job application. So this information in here will never change. If you update the candidate's profile, anything, this information will not change because we wanted to give you kind of a pristine version of what their application looked like whenever they apply. You do have the option, as you learn more about the candidate in their full profile, to have a more, CRM type experience to be able to update these things. Maybe you have a phone screen with this candidate, and maybe their education level is actually some college. So you can come in here and you can make edits appropriately. But again, the job application is that pristine point-in-time snapshot of what they filled out then. One other update that we made here, again, this was highly requested by our customers, and that's giving me the ability to print, a candidate's information easily. So right now, the only thing that we allow you to print on the profile is the resume. So this allows you to easily come in. When you hit print, it will open up a new tab, and it gives you candidate information, including contact information, the date they applied. You also get the job that they've applied for, including the department and the hiring manager. And then you get the cover letter if they filled one out. And then again, a reiteration of their job application that includes all of their common questions and questionnaire questions. So again, really easy. You can print this, prints out nice. You can share this internally or keep it on file. Whatever you would use to print out, you can do that through here. And so the last piece before we go back and I show you how to set up a, an auto rejection action based on these questions, the questionnaire does show up here. So you can see my 2 questionnaire questions are along with this job application. So one thing I want to mention is you might be used to going in and looking at questions that were completed on the job application over here on this bar. They're now down here with all the other job application questions. Again, the main reason for that is now you have one view of being able to screen and either disqualify or qualify a candidate. So you can come in here without any extra clicks of having to open up the questionnaire. It now exists right in this job application section. Again, the purpose here was so you can easily review candidates more quickly, both with the flags and with all the information that you need within one page. So let's go ahead back into the job now, and let's set up a auto reject. Let's go ahead and set up a auto reject action. So pretty much what I'm saying here is based off of these 3 questions, I want to auto reject a candidate to a particular not hired status. So to do that, I'm going to come in and I'm going to select auto reject candidate. And when I get here, I get an overview of the questions. So here's my 3 questions. And what you're setting up is essentially when a candidate submits any disqualifying answer, they're going to be dispositioned. So I have 3 questions here. If I answer yes to flux capacitor and bachelor degree for this college question, and then I say no to age 18 or older, because I answered one of the 3 questions as disqualifying, I will still be rejected. So I just want to make that clear. It is if any of the flagged answers are deemed, a disqualifying answer is when this candidate will be auto rejected. So the next step here is to select a not hired status. So this pretty much pulls from the not hired statuses on this job, and you can select a status. In this case, I'm going to select not qualified. And then this is also really cool. This is kind of what I mentioned before. You could imagine it would be a terrible applicant experience if I applied for this job and I get 2 emails immediately into my inbox. I get a thanks for applying and you've been, rejected. I get a rejection email. So that would be a terrible applicant experience. So we wanted to put something in place so that wouldn't happen. So as you guys know, if not, I suggest reading up on workflow helpers. They're a really good way to automate your hiring process. But brief overview of what a workflow helper is. It's the ability to tie triggered events or triggered emails to workflow statuses. So just to kind of show you what that looks like for this particular job, if I come into the workflow tab, under this not hired dispositions, for candidates that are not qualified, I can set up an email of a rejection letter to be sent out to those candidates anytime I put a candidate into that status. So again, really streamlining things. You want to keep up your company rapport by closing the loop with candidates. This is the best way to do it. But like I mentioned, that experience where a candidate automatically gets put into that not qualified stage and gets an email is a bad one. So what we put in place is the ability to select a delay for that email. In fact, we enforce a delay on that email at the minimum of 12 hours, and you can go all the way up to 7 days. So again, if a candidate applies, they'll get, if they answer any of these questions as disqualifying, they're going to go into this not qualified status, and then 48 hours later, they will get a rejection email. And I kind of want to show you exactly what that looks like. So I'm going to save this action. And you'll kind of be able to see that here. Again, you can only add one action, so feel free to delete this or come back and edit it if needed, but you'll be able to see that here on the job application page. So now let's go ahead and apply as a candidate that would get kind of auto-rejected.
And this is your actual experience if you would be applying for a DeLorean technician position, right, John?
Exactly.
Yeah, just automatically rejected.
Yeah, I am not qualified.
He has no experience with flux capacitors, so
nope.
It's not going to happen.
So just to show you, I'm going to answer one of these questions correctly, and I'm going to answer the other two questions incorrectly.
I also like that the answers to the flux capacitor questions are in all caps. It's very clear.
Yeah, it's very clear that I do not have any experience with the flux capacitor. Okay, so I've applied as this candidate, so let's go ahead back and view that candidate's profile. So again, this candidate will not show up in the new status. They will automatically be placed into a not qualified disposition. So let's go ahead and open that candidate's profile. So the first thing that I see here is we will apply a tag to any candidates that were auto-rejected. So again, this allows you to easily recognize that this candidate was auto-rejected and they weren't manually moved into a not another user. Also, one other brief, add here, one other way to know if a candidate was rejected. You can kind of see here that this candidate was auto-rejected and moved to not qualified. We also mentioned that if you want to modify knockout questions or disable the auto-rejection, you can click here. This will take you to the application page to make any changes. So if for some reason, you set it up incorrectly, this is kind of a catch-all while you're reviewing the candidate to be able to easily make that update. Again, if a user does not have edit rights to the job, they will not see kind of this whole line of text. They'll just see the fact that the candidate was auto-rejected. Similar to the candidate that we just showed you before, the job application has the flagged answers here as well. So you can see exactly what led to this candidate being auto-rejected by the system. So again, they get a tag at the top. They get a discussion tab that explains that, and then they get moved to not qualified. One other quick kind of ancillary item here is if you do move a candidate into another status, another not hired status, we will still show them as auto-rejected because essentially that's how they got into a not hired disposition to begin with. But say you come back in and maybe this candidate applies again and you actually want to consider them for the job, you can actually move them back to new or back to an active status. And if you do that, you'll notice that we remove that auto-reject flag. The history of them being auto-rejected and how they were moved back through the process will still be captured here. But we just didn't want to cause any confusion by keeping a auto-rejected flag on a non-rejected candidate. So just one little ancillary item that I just wanted to review there. So again, keep your questions coming in. We're going to try to get to as many of them after kind of the demo as possible, and any other ones we will make sure they get answered. Two other updates that I want to show you, not 100% tied to knockout questions, but just some updates that we made to improve the user experience. The first one is the quick screen. So if you pull up quick screen currently, and if you're not familiar with quick screen, essentially it is the best way to quickly screen new candidates. It's also a mobile-friendly environment, so feel free to type this URL into a mobile device. This looks really good on a mobile platform. You can easily review candidates, on your way to work, on the train, wherever. Works on tablets and phones. But essentially, the update that I wanted to show here is prior to this update, we had two tabs. We actually had 4 tabs at the top. One of them was for cover letter and questionnaire, and the other one was for profile questions. We've essentially pushed those together, so now you see the cover letter. Now you will see the job application, again, with all the questions and the answers, including the questionnaire questions, and then any source information. So this has the same information. We just wanted to be able to show you the flagged questions, and again, putting the context of all of the questions that they put on the job application on one page just to improve that screening experience. And last but not least, the last update that we kind of made is to the questionnaire templates section. Now, this is really just a reiteration of what we went through on the job application. The experience for adding and editing questionnaires is identical in the template section as it is on the job. One update here is we did increase kind of the organization of these by adding a folder structure similar to kind of how you see in documents. But now you can make, if you have a list of sales questionnaires, or, maybe you want to start to put these in folders based on departments, or however you really want to organize these. Instead of having just one long list, you can just now have a better way to organize these via folders. You can add new folders. You can move questionnaires into other folders if you need to. Really just a typical folder structure here, just so you can stay more organized. And then again, the look and feel of this area has been updated, but the functionality is the same as you're used to. We do show you if it's shared by other jobs, which is really nice. You have quick links to access those jobs. You can reorder questions. You can preview the questionnaire. One update that we did add, and again, this exists in the context of a job as well. You can easily reorder these questions now, which you couldn't in the past. So again, a lot of these little and big updates come directly from customer feedback. So I can't encourage you guys more. The only way that we get better as a product and as a company is listening to our customers. So please, if you have any feedback, if you work with one of our CSMs, or you're chatting in, or feel free to send over any feedback, any suggestions that you have on our app. We're listening, and that's really how we get better. And this is just one little area where you guys wanted to be able to reorder possible answers, so we made sure that we got that in this launch. But back to this, kind of, again, just a simple update to the interface here to match kind of what it looks like on the job and that folder structure. We also did a minor update to the flow of how you add questionnaires within the context of a workflow. So pretty minor here, but essentially just kind of a new look and feel. You do have the ability to kind of edit in the context of a workflow helper now, similar to everywhere else. Again, all of this was so you don't have to necessarily go back into, you don't have to leave the context that you were in, setting up a workflow or setting up a job, to have to go back into the template section just to make an update. You can now do that real time within this modal here or within the job application page, and still be informed by what you're actually changing. So that's, again, was kind of the goal of a lot of these updates to the questionnaires. Awesome. So that's knockout questions and kind of all the other updates that we kind of made across the app. So again, if you guys have any questions, I know we're going to get to Q&A here in a second, but I'm going to kind of turn it back to Lila as she goes over one last thing before we get into Q&A.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Very helpful. I hope you guys are excited as I am about this. So if you do ever need any help, there is a great support article, and I know you guys can't click on this right now, tapping energize, but you will get the link in the follow-up email that I have with the slides, and then also it's right in JazzHR. So if you hop into JazzHR and step over to the application section, you can just click, what's this, or how to set up right in there on knockout questions, and it'll walk you through. So it's a pretty comprehensive walkthrough that should help you get it set up. Plus, it's pretty easy. So if you do have questions, I do have our support right there as well. So you can reach out to support, and they'll help you out too to get that set up. And I do always like to do a plug for our blog, because there's actually a lot of helpful things in there, not just about HR, but we do a lot of posts about, best practices for using JazzHR. So if you're wondering, how to get your hiring managers more involved, or some best some of the cooler features that we think you might be interested in using. Our blog has a lot of that information, so I always like to give it a quick plug, and I write some of those, so I got to do some shameless self-promotion here. Great, so we'll start getting to your questions here. We had a lot of good ones come in, so feel free to keep asking. We still have a lot of people in here today, so definitely if you have that question on your mind, likely one of your peers and your colleagues does too, so speak up if you can. So we had a question here, can you make multiple questionnaires? So you can absolutely make as many questionnaires as you want, but you can only have one questionnaire per job. So what you might want to do if you have a similar set of questions that you're asking for every job at your company, like you have some culture questions or you hire for a lot of the same positions, you might just want to create like a questionnaire template that you end up cloning and then adding additional questions to, and then using that on your similar type jobs. So, you have your basic questions, you just come in and clone them and then add any additional questions that's related to that position or that type of job. So that's what I would say for the multiple questionnaires one. Can we default a questionnaire to use for every job we create? So again, I would use cloning for this. I would actually clone a job versus a questionnaire. I would make like a job template. This is really useful for common questions too, because it'll port those over as well. You can just create a job and call it job template, clone me, or something that indicates that that's the one to use, and then clone that job and then just swap out any of the details that you have in there. This is really good too for maintaining consistency across job descriptions, like formatting, titles, departments, codes, things like that you do want to have consistency across. So this is just the best practice, I think, in general for creating jobs. And then you can attach that questionnaire that you want to be the default to your job that you clone, and you'll be good to go. So I would, again, use cloning for that. Cloning is our friend. It's not as controversial as it is in the real world here. So will changes on a questionnaire reflect on closed jobs? Yes. Yes. Okay. John is nodding at me. So that is correct. So yeah, they will be affected on closed jobs. So can sending out a questionnaire after the knockout question application is completed be automatic? Yes. So when someone applies, oh no, you can't do it to not. That's not how you set it up. So if you don't auto-reject a candidate, if you don't have auto-reject set up, just the flagging portion, you can have it send a questionnaire automatically depending on what disposition, or what status you put them in next. Mm-hmm. If you're going to have them auto-reject, you cannot have another questionnaire go out to them because it will put them into a not hired disposition. So the answer is yes, but depending on how you want to set that up. So you cannot set up the auto-reject for that. So if you want to get a few screening questions in at the beginning, but you still want to have that follow-up questionnaire, just make sure you don't auto-reject them. Just leave that flagging portion on. Yep. And if you have any further questions about how to set that up, please do contact support, because it sounds complicated as I describe it, but it's actually really simple. Let's see, lots of questions here. Yeah.
So we got one question here. It says, if there is a 48-hour delay on a rejection email, could other emails go out to that candidate just when you move the candidate? So that's a good question, Allison. So essentially, what we do is whenever that email is scheduled to go out, if you go to that candidate's email tab where you would typically send out an email, we don't prohibit you from sending out more emails, but what we do show you is the fact that the very top email will say that it's scheduled to go out. So you'll be able to visually see that there is a rejection letter scheduled to go out to that candidate for 48 hours after they were auto-rejected. At that point, you can choose to delete that email if you don't want to send it, but you could actually send another question if you want, or another email if you want, sorry.
Awesome. And then we had a couple questions here related to the automatic emails. So one of them was, the automatic email a candidate gets when they apply cannot be different if they're screened out based on knockout questions. So it can, but you'll have to create a separate not hired status, like you could name your not hired disposition knockout or something like that, and then you can add the appropriate email that you would want, into that workflow helper, as a workflow helper. So you would want to make a separate not hired disposition and then add that specific email that you want to that not hired disposition, and then make sure that all of your candidates that are being knocked out go into that not hired disposition. So that would be the way to make sure that they get a specific email. Yeah, John?
Yeah, one other update to that one. If you wanted to do that, if you wanted to have an email sent out for those types of candidates, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you're okay with the automated email, automated reply to candidates email that's located on the news stage would be the default one if they were not auto-rejected. So I just want to kind of reinforce that, that would be the default outside of the new one that you created on the not hired status.
Yeah. Another question about those dispositions and where they're getting knocked out to. So can you move a candidate to another category that isn't rejected with knockout questions? So they have to be moved into a not hired disposition. We did build it out with the idea of maybe being able to do something different in the future, like moving them into a hired or anything other, well, hired would be insane, but another status like an active or different status. But for right now, it's only in the not hired statuses. So you could put hired status. In your example, Kelly, you asked about juniors and seniors and things like that. You can, create those in a not hired context and maybe name it auto screen or auto screen juniors, auto screen seniors, so that your team knows what it's referring to, so that you can go back and search or report on those. But for now, it is all in the context of a not hired disposition.
Yeah, that's a good one. Also, those are the types of things that we can, iterate on knockout questions. Now that we have this idea of certain answers to questions do something inside of Jazz, now that we have that, we'd love to hear your feedback on what you want to do more. For example, do you want some type of way to auto-categorize candidates based on questions, or maybe auto-star them, or some way to show a positive answer to a question? So again, there's a lot of different ways that we can now start to iterate and improve on this kind of framework. We would love to hear feedback, love to hear use cases for why you want to do it, and that is always something that we want to keep in consideration kind of as we make future improvements to this feature.
Yeah, and a good question that went along with this was Morgan was asking for the ability to use knockout questions as a watch list or a flagging system, kind of in the reverse idea of candidates that you want to consider high priority. So obviously, like I mentioned, I just explained to Kelly and everybody that if you do want to use it a little bit differently, you still have to put it in the context of a not hired disposition, but that doesn't mean that you can't reuse it creatively however you want. I mean, obviously, our workflows are completely customizable, so you can name the stages whatever you want, even if it is kind of in that context of a not hired disposition. That doesn't necessarily mean that they, weren't a good fit for your company overall. They just weren't a good fit for that role, or maybe you just want to knock them out of the running and put them into a different bucket. So you can use your workflow stages creatively for this, however you want to do it. We're a pretty flexible system, but for right now, the specific focus is just automatically rejecting those candidates into a not hired disposition. But feel free to use them however you want. So there's definitely no restrictions on how you want to name your statuses, obviously. So get creative with it. We have a lot of really awesome questions here. Trying to see if there's a quick one that I can get to. Can you use knockout questions other than at the application phase? So right now it's only at the application section. So if you're going to send a questionnaire automatically after they apply, you can't use knockout questions in that sent. So it's only when they're filling out that initial application when they find your job online, at a job board, through a link or something like that. So right now it is just at the application phase.
Yep, and so we have another question here. It's also, is the auto-rejected candidate alerted that they have been rejected? And the answer to that is by default, no. But like I went through in the demo, you can add a email workflow helper to that auto-rejected status that will be sent to candidates when they're put into that status. So if you do want to inform them, which I do recommend, that is recruiting best practices, that is keeping up your company rapport. But if for some reason you don't want to close the loop in an automated fashion, you can always reach out to them after or send a bulk email, maybe after you fill the position to alert those candidates. But by default, we won't alert them if they've been auto-rejected. It's something that you would have to set up or already have set up via the workflow helper.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more question here. So I have email templates already created. Can those be linked to reject email messages candidate? Yeah, so if you have email templates already set up, just go into your workflows, and then you'll see a little add button, a little add link on the right-hand side. You can just click add and then email, and then it's pretty intuitive to go ahead and add that email to your workflow. Just make sure you select that it's going to the candidate, and then you'll be all set. So adding email workflow helpers is really simple. And then if you need help or a walkthrough, if you go to our knowledge base, just success.jazz.co, you can just search in workflow helpers, and there's really nice video walkthroughs on there. So that is definitely one of the simple things to do in the system. One other quick question, how do I change the person the auto reply is from? That's a good one. I believe you have to change the hiring manager on the job.
That's a really good question. So by default, the way that it works is the person that, so outside of knockout questions, if, whoever triggers that workflow helper, so whoever moves that candidate into a not hired status will be labeled as the sender. So it'll come from that person that triggered that email to be sent out. Knockout questions will actually be sent on behalf of the company. So we'll insert your company name. For example, if we send it at the JazzHR account, it would say JazzHR, and then the reply email, the reply to address will be the kind of prospect kind of communication that pushes it back into Jazz, and you'll be updated, the hiring manager would be updated on that, any responses that come to that candidate's profile. So it's from the company, that's kind of what the name is, and again, that's for candidates that are auto-rejected with a email workflow helper set up, and the replies will be pushed into their Jazz candidate profile. Which user? It wouldn't actually come from a user. It would come generically from the company, and any replies would be sent to the hiring manager. The candidate wouldn't know that the hiring manager was the recipient of that email. That's more of a notification to the hiring manager that a candidate did reply to that rejection email, and the response to that email will show in the candidate's email tab.
Gotcha. All right, we'll answer one more here, and then we'll finish up for the day. And then I know anyone who has questions remaining, don't worry, we'll get you over to support. Question from our neighbor, Katie. When you auto-reject a candidate, is there a way to hide them from the view in the job? So Katie, what I would probably do is just tab through on the job dashboard, like in those boxes where it says the total number of candidates, new, not hired. I would just use that to filter versus going through and they're going to automatically be hidden. They will be automatically put into a not hired status, but we didn't want to hide them for fear of people wanting to look through and double check to make sure any of those candidates might actually be a good fit. especially those who are just using the auto flagging portion. So they'll show up in your not hired view. They won't be hidden, but I like to use those tabs to filter through at the top to make sure and I'm only really seeing the candidates I want to at the moment. There's also an option if you click your initials in the upper right-hand corner and then click My Profile. You can scroll down and there's an option that you can have that says only show me new or active candidates. And you can check that button to change your view so that you only see that, those particular candidates. So if you're getting overwhelmed by the amount of not hired candidates, you can click, it's under data visibility settings, My Profile. You can click only show me applicants that are filed under new or active statuses. So if you guys want to just hide not hired candidates in general, it's a good way to sort of get through that. A lot of people turn that on and kind of flip it on and off depending on what the type of screening they're doing. So that's just an FYI. But I think that's all the time we have for questions today, guys. Thank you so much for all the great questions. And if you feel like we didn't get to yours or anything, like I said, we will reach out to support. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be sending you the recording. We also have a brief survey for you at the end of this webinar if you wouldn't mind completing it to give us some feedback and help shape future webinars and us and how we conduct these and also the product. So feel free to fill that out if you have just a couple minutes. That would be great. And I really appreciate everybody joining today. And thank you so much to John for walking us through. And enjoy the rest of your day.